In this video series, we will explore the founding of Fort Vancouver by the Hudson's Bay Company in 1825 and its evolution into the Fort Vancouver National Historic Trust. The fort's first building site was located about 1 mile from where the current fort stands. The site is now known as the Washington State School for the Deaf. One of the most influential people at Fort Vancouver was its chief factor, John McLaughlin. Douglas Wilson said McLaughlin's influence and benevolence to the pioneers is reflected in his modern title as the Father of Oregon. On February 2, 2013, we took a step back in time to explore what Fort Vancouver looked like when the Hudson's Bay Company was in full operation. Our first stop inside the fort is the chief factor's residence. This home was occupied by Dr. John McLaughlin. According to employees with the National Park Service, this home was shared by two separate families. This was also the prime meeting place for the gentlemen of the fort to have dinner, and it also served as a meeting place for weddings and funerals. In the 1800s, there was no social medias, internets, or televisions, so leisure time was often spent reading. We will walk through different areas of the home to show how it may have been furnished at the time Dr. McLaughlin and his family lived there. The National Forest Center volunteers mentioned the brightly painted walls was a symbol of social status during the time period. Also note that the Columbia River had not yet been harnessed to provide electricity for homes, so candles were used for light and wood stoves for heating and cooking. On the table, you can see pipes used to smoke tobacco. Tobacco was a popular trade item with both the natives as well as the employees of the Hudson Bay Company. This is the bakehouse. It contained two fire brick ovens where sea biscuits were made to feed the employees of the Hudson Bay Company. This is the iron store. There was no hardware store when the Hudson's Bay Company was in operation, so the items were made in iron shops by blacksmiths. Females were generally not blacksmiths during this period. Usually the only paid job they could get was at a laundress. Traps like this one were used by employees to capture fur-bearing animals. Miscellaneous tools prepared for the fort's inhabitants to include axe heads. From the top of the fort's stone, you can see Mount Hood in the distance, as well as the villages where many different people of different cultures who were employed by the Hudson's Bay Company lived. No fort is complete without its defensive armament, according to the National Park Service. Relations with many of the coastal Native Americans were friendly, and the fort did not actually construct its high walls until after the arrival of American settlers due to the fear of theft. The cannons themselves were actually placed at the fort after an embarrassing incident with a British ship that fired her cannons as a salute to the fort, and the fort was unable to return the honor because it had no cannons to do so. The fort's bastion, about 3 stories high, had 8 3-pound cannons and several rifle ports covering 360 degrees. This is a replica of how Fort Vancouver looked during the Hudson Bay Company years.